Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Bava Kamma daf Samach Daled. And we are, I left yesterday, us in a real cliffhanger because the question is, we had two brises. Let me go through those brises and then we'll be able to get started. And I'll also do a little bit of conceptual background so that we have some of the necessary tools in order for us to be able to understand everything. So hold on for a second. Here we go. Let me share my screen and we are ready to go. So I also will note that our learning today again should be continued refuah shalema for Dan Eliyahu ben Dvora, and he should have a speedy recovery. Okay, so again, we left yesterday with a cliffhanger. We had two brises. We had one brisa that says that both Shmot Kafbet Pasuk Vav and Shmot Kafbet Pasuk Zion relate to somebody who's watching something and then claims that it was stolen and then swears to that effect, then of course gets caught out to be a liar and in fact has the object and it has eaten the object. And then the watcher is going to be obligated to pay double. If they've consumed the object, they're going to be obligated to pay double. And the second brisa, we had two brises yesterday, and the second brisa said that both Shmot Kafbet, that Shmot Kafbet Pasuk Vav dealt with an ordinary thief, and Shmot Kafbet Pasuk Zion dealt with a watcher who claims theft. So according to the second brisa, we know the source for an ordinary thief's obligation to pay double is Shmot Kafbet Pasuk Vav. But according to the first brisa, what is the source for an ordinary thief's need to pay double? And the Gemara said, well, maybe we can say that it's a kal v'chomer, but that didn't work out, because if it was a kal v'chomer, then the requirement would also need to involve an oath, because when you have a kal v'chomer that you learn from one item to another, you have to learn all of the limitations associated with that item. As I gave the example, if you tell me that you can lift up 10 pounds, I will know that you can lift up 5 pounds, but you got to be on Earth, because if you're on a different planet, the weights could be different. And so being able to lift 5 pounds isn't necessarily true, because that same 5-pound barbell will weigh a lot more on Jupiter. So the point is that similarly, when we have this kal v'chomer, the situation is that if you were to try and learn it from somebody who claims that a watched item was stolen, well, that person needs to make an oath, and if they don't make an oath, they won't be that they're violating. They won't be actually subject to the double payment. And so, we would say, if we learn from a kal v'chomer from that, then we would say that you also would need to make an oath here. And by the way, I'll note that we will analyze further that kal v'chomer during the course of today. But the bottom line is that we noted the problem with the kal v'chomer yesterday, and so as a result, we said we need to find another source. So what is that source? That's the question that we're going to begin with. But before we do so, I want to go over three of the rules. We say them in Rabbi Yishmael every day at the beginning of davening, when we say the 13 principles through which the Torah is expounded. So the first is a klal uprat, when you have a generalization followed by a specific rule. So if I tell you, you can do all of these, you can do anything, but you have to do it, with your hands or whatever. So then the prat is the limitation, meaning that whatever the limitation is, that is going to be it's as if there was no generalization whatsoever. We just focus on the specifics. On the other hand, if the order is reversed, if first we have the specifics, if I first tell you that you have to do something with your hands, and then I say, but you can do it with anything, well, then we essentially ignore the fact that I gave the specifics and we focus only on the generalization. On the other hand, or on the third hand, I guess in this case, we have a klal uprat uklal. And that, so again, the klal prat, we follow the specifics. Pradu klal, we follow the generalization. Klalu pradu klal, when you have a generalization followed by a specification, followed by a second generalization, then we're going to use the specification that's in the middle to understand the generalization. And basically, we'll generalize those specific cases. So that's an important understanding of these three principles, and want to make sure that we understand it. So now we're ready to pick up with the third to last line on Samach Gimel on the bet, and again answer the question that we will just leave as an implicit question, but we actually asked it yesterday, so that's why it's in parentheses. And so the question is how does the author of our first brisa, the one who tributes both verses to the Toan Tainus Ganav, and we're going to use that phrase, Toan Tainus Ganav, the one who makes a claim of theft. So that's the situation, and we're going to say, and again, of course, that first brisa said that both psukim deal with it, and so how does the one who says that both psukim are about Toan Tainus Ganav, how does he derive the fact that an ordinary thief pays double? So let's take a look. So Nafkale Miditana Debechizkia. So he's going to learn it from the way that something that was taught by a Tana of Bechizkia. Because what did he tell? What did the Tana of Bechizkia? Yomar Shor. So now let's just background on what we're about to do. We're about to try, and we're going to sort of analyze the pasuk Perak Kafet pasuk Gimel, where we say if the stolen item is found in his possession, whether an ox, a donkey, or a sheep alive, he shall pay double. So we're going to analyze that verse, which we have not used, right? Remember that the verse in our brisa was Kaf Bet, Pasuk Vav, and Pasuk Zayin. That's what we dealt with before. And now we're going to use Pasuk Gimel and see what does that teach us. And we're going to go through and say that, hey, this teaches us about what is incorporated, what is included in the things that for which one would have to pay double. And we're going to break it down, and let's take a look. So the first, and we're going to have, it's going to come in three questions, the teaching of the Tana of Chizkiah. And then we're going to note the problem with what Chizkiah says, what the Tana says, and then we'll answer it, and that will be much of our learning today. So let's take a look. So Yomer Shor Geneva Kol B'chlal. So why did the pasuk, again, the pasuk references an ox, a donkey, and a sheep, and it references the fact that they all are alive, and it says that he's got to pay double. So why not let the Torah just tell us Shor and Geneva and Kol B'chlal, and I would know everything? Meaning, let's understand that there's essentially a prat of Shor, and Geneva is a klal, and we'll learn everything. Now, as we just saw, we're going to see that well, first of all, the issue is that the reference to a stolen item, the Geneva, is before the specifics. So this is not actually a pradu klal. This is actually a klalu prat. So we're going to address that issue shortly. And that really confused me, as is often the case. The Gemara will ask the question that is right on the tip of your tongue. And so Yomer Shor Geneva V'Kol B'chlal. Why not let the pasuk just say a shor, first an ox, and then the stolen item, and then everything would be included. So Ilu Kach Hayiti Omer. Well, if that was the case, then I would have said the following. I would have undermined that pradu klal. Now that's also going to be a problem because you don't undermine a pradu klal. Pradu klal, you just include everything. So we're going to address that question as well. Ilu Kach Hayita Omer. If I were to have said that, Maha prat meforish karav legabi mizbeach. Just as the specific item, the ox, is an animal that's offered on the altar, avkol karav legabi mizbeach. I would say don't include everything, include only other animals that can be offered on the mizbeach, on the altar. So ma yesh lecha lahavi, and what would that tell you to include? That would tell you that you could include a sheep. Well, now as we pick up with Samach Dalet and Aleph, Kishahu Omer said, when the Torah now says sheep, hare Omer. Well, now you've said specifically sheep. So how come if in fact, so it can't just tell us the fact that you included an ox and you included the item stolen, a general category of the stolen item. So it can't just come to include sheep because sheep itself was said. So ha ma ani mikayim geneva. So how do I understand the generalization of geneva? So larabos kol davar. So it comes to teach us everything. So now the next step of the Gemara of the Brisa is to ask the following. So all right, so Yomer Sharvis se ugeneva. Why not say sure and Geneva and the Gimba Kol Bachlal, and we would learn everything. So why did you need to also add donkey? So ilu kachayiti omar, because if I had just said those three things, the shore and Geneva, mahaprat meforish davar b'hakadosh v'chora, I would have said that all of those items are things that are consecrated with the firstborn. So to anything else where the firstborn is a consecrated animal. So and what would that come to include? Chamor, that would come to include a donkey. So kishahu omer chamor, hare chamor amor. So you already learned donkey. So that shows hama ani mekayim geneva. So now what do I use the generalization of stolen item to include L'Rabbos Kol Davar? So it must be to teach us everything. So in second, if you're saying that Yomer Shor v'Chamor the Se Ugeneva v'Kol B'Chlal, why not? All right, you reference three animals. Why not mention? Why mention the fact that the animal is alive? Why mention Chayim at all? So ilu kachayiti omer, because that I'll tell you, because if we had not mentioned the fact that it was a chayim, so then maha prat before balechayim. So all of the specific items that are listed are alive. Av kol balechayim. So to every living thing. So mayesh lecha lahavi shar balechayim. So that would only come to include living things. But Kishu Omer Chayim. So now when the Torah actually says the word Chayim, Hare Chayim Amor. So we now know that live things are included. So therefore, so Ha Ma'ani Mekayim Geneva. So now what can the generalization teach us? So L'Rabos Kol Davar. So it must come to include everything. So now we're going to ask the question that I sort of said at the very beginning was an obvious question to be asked on this brisa, and we're going to address it right now. So, Amar Mar, 1 second. You, the author of this brisa, you said Yomer Shor Ugneva, but Miksiv Shor Ugneva, does it actually say a shore and then Geneva? No, Geneva v'shor hum tiksiv. It first says the stolen item and then references ox. That's a klal uprat. So I'm not supposed to derive a broader lesson. And if you want to try to interpret this brisa as saying that if it had been written this way, that if it had been written as an ox and then the stolen item, well, ilu nemar shor ugeneva, if in fact all you had was shor and geneva, mimatzis amrat ma prat meforash, would you be able to reference the specific item and say that we should limit this in some way at all? Have a shor prat, ugeneva klal. This would be the shor would be a prat, the geneva would be a klal, and prat uklal nasa klal mosif ala prat. The generalization expands the specification without any limitation of the specification. So as a result, why are you trying to limit the situation? And so everything should be included. There shouldn't be any kind of limitation whatsoever. Ella kediksiv kamri. So all right, so you want to try and say that we weren't trying to say that it should have been written, but it was actually written this way. So, but Geneva v'shor, it was written Geneva and then short. The generalization, it was written before the specification. And mimat is amra hakol b'chlal. Can you possibly tell me that more things are included? Because omah prat meforosh, or that everything should be included, or that similar things to the specific items should be included. Havale geneva klal b'shor prat. we have here a klal and then a prat, the klal of Geneva, followed by the prat of shore. Klal uprat, aim beklal elamav shebaprat. We only look at the items of the specification. So shore in midiakrina low. So the lesson of Geneva followed by shore should be only an ox and not anything else. So how could you suggest in this brisa, author, that this is supposed to be a some kind of expansion from the reference to Geneva and shore? So Rava. So Rava says the following: Tana achayim kasamechle. This Tana was reliant on the word chayim. That the word chayim in the pasuk. So again, the pasuk said. Let's go back to the top here. If the stolen item is found in his possession, whether an ox, a donkey, or a sheep, alive, he shall pay double. So now what we're saying is, don't just focus on the stolen item and the ox, donkey, and sheep, but rather recognize that stolen item is one generalization, alive is another generalization, and ox, donkey, and sheep are in the middle. So we have a klal, uprat, uklal. So let's do that. That's what Rabba is saying. So uklal, hold on just a second. So we have a klal, uprat, uklal. So so right now the person who's going to win is the author of the brisa. Now is going to make some sense. And so let's take a look and we'll see Kamma hatlei. So the whole lesson is a one of klal prat. V'halo dami klala basar l'chala Kamma. So 1 second, they ask on Rabba's explanation. There's a problem with trying to understand alive as a generalization, because if alive is a generalization, that is a different kind of generalization than Geneva. Geneva implies anything that's stolen. Alive implies only animals or only living objects that are stolen. So how does that work? You don't have a comparable generalization. So Hatana Deve Rabbi Yishmael, so the author of this is also like the Tana of Rabbi Yishmael's yeshiva. Because what did he say? Because he said that the Tana of Rabbi Yishmael's academy also says that even if the generalizations don't match, you can do a klal of prado klal. So now that we've finished that, and here's what the Tana was trying to say. He was trying to really ask a question. Im himatse timatse lamali. When we say at the very beginning of the verse, as we go back up to the beginning of the verse, if the stolen item is found, well, the language of found, even though I only used it once, it's a double language in the Hebrew verse, because it says himatse timatse. If the finding shall be found, is really what it is. So if the stolen item finding should be found, that in his possession. So why the double language? So that's what we're asking. And this is an important question if we take a look at Rashi, because we'll look at Rashi 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 22 lines up from the bottom. That comes to seem to suggest some other inclusion. So Lamali, why do we need this inclusion at the beginning of this verse? And now Rava is going to reread the entire brisa. So let's take a look, and here we're going to have the reread. So Yomer Shor Ugeneva B'Chayim V'Kol B'Chlal. Why not just have Shor, Geneva, and Chayim, and we would know that everything is included, because we have Shor, one generalization. We have Geneva at the beginning. That's one generalization. Then we have Shor, and then we have Chayim. So it all works. Ilu Kain Hayiti Omer Mahaprat Meforish Davar Hakarev Lagabi Mizbeach Av Kol Hakarev Lagabi Mizbeach. So, but if that were the case, if that were our interpretation, that doesn't work, because maybe we would say that this is a klal product klal, and we have to follow the limitations of the specific item. And just as an ox is something that's offered on the altar, so to anything that would be altered only things that would be altered offered on the altar will be included in the prohibition, in the fact that you'd have to pay double for a stolen item. So mayesh lahavi. So in second, so now what would you try to include? Say you try to include sheep. But Kishahu Omer says, so now the pasuk itself tells us sheep. So hare se amor hama ani makayim geneva. So now that said. So how do I fulfill the generalization of geneva? So the rabbis called the var must be to include everything. So all right. So yomer geneva v'shor v'seh v'chayim v'kol v'genev v'chlal. So why not say again the klal of geneva followed by the specifics of shor and seh followed by chayim? And I would say everything should be included because no. That doesn't work either because ilu kain hayiti omar ma'aprat meforish davar hakadosh b'bechora kol davar hakadosh b'bechora. I should say that anything that becomes holy as a firstborn animal should be included, which would come to include donkeys. So ma'yesh lecha lahavi, what would that come to include? Chamor, a donkey. So kishahu omer chamor, hare chamor amor. But we already know donkey because the pasuk actually included. So hama ani mekayim geneba. So how do I fulfill the generalization of geneba? L'ravos kol davar. So must be to include everything. Well, one second, Yomer Geneva v'shor v'seh v'chamor v'chayim v'kol b'chlal. So all right, so let's say that we have the generalization of Geneva at the beginning, the specifics of shor, seh, v'chamor in the middle, the generalization of v'chayim at the end, and let's learn everything. But ilu kain hayiti omer ma'aprat meforish balei chayim av kol balei chayim. But we could say that maybe the specifications are all living items, and so we should just expand to include living items, meaning let's follow the generalization at the end. So mayesh lo l'chalahavi, shar balei chayim, so let's include other living things. Well, kishahu omer chayim, hare chayim amor. But when you have the fact that it says living, so we know other living things. So ha ma'ani mekayim geneva, how do I understand geneva? So must be l'ravos kol davar. So im himatzei timatzei lamali, and so as a result, the brayta ends. What do I use with the words himatzei timatzei? And this was all a long effort to tell us that it must be that himatzei timatzei is the basis for the author of the first brisa, who learns the pasuk vav and zayin are all about the toentinus ganav. That must be how he learns that a ordinary thief would also be subject to the double payment. That the addition, the fact that the language of himatzei timatzei should include something, and we have nothing for it to include. So let's let that be the basis to include an object that is stolen by an ordinary thief, and that we would be obligated to pay double in that case. So let's now turn to Samach Dalet Amabet. So Ihafi Shagar Kashya. So in second, this is a good question. And so as a result, again, this good question is so good that it will provide us with a basis to say that an ordinary thief will be subject to the double payment according to the first brisa. So 1 second, actually, it turns out that there's a problem. Mishum to Islay Pircha. Actually, we need to reference himatzei timatzei because I got a question for you, and we can undermine the klal u'pradu klal that we've been teaching. Because l'rabbos kol davar meheka kamaisele. How do you try to include everything? Miklal basra from the last generalization. Klala gufe chayim ksive. That last generalization, the last generalization was the word alive. So klal u'prat u'klal my kamahanile. So what helped us the klal u'prat u'klal? You should follow the last generalization. So and ila tuye kol davar hachayim ksiv. If you want to try and say that the generalization includes everything, how can you do so? It says the last generalization says chayim itself. So bale chayim in. Low. So the last generalization basically tells us that it's only things that are alive and not other things. So mishum hachi itzrich im himatzei timatzei. So that's why it needs to say the expansion of himatzei timatzei, because otherwise our klal u'pradu klal doesn't work. So 1 second. So now amrei v'ha shnei klalos tismichi adadininhu. But one second, if we take a look at the verse, so now we're saying that the two generalizations in the verse are timatse, if the item is found, and the reference to Geneva, the stolen item. So, but those two items are not, they don't find between them the words ox, donkey, or sheep and alive. So we don't actually have a klal uprat klal. What we have is a klal uprat. So how is that going to work? So I'm a Ravina. Ravina explains that actually it can still work because we can say, did the Amri, let's find this. Sorry, I want to make sure we're at the right place. As is said in Israel, whenever you have two generalizations next to each other, this is where we're up to on the screen. You can move the specification to the middle of them. And then you can learn it as a klal uprat, and namely a klal uprat uklal in this case. So shadei shor bein himatzei letimatzei. So you can put the shor between himatzei and timatzei. So latuye mai. So now what does that come to include? So ilatuye balechayim mechayim nafkel. Well, and if you wanted to say that it comes to include just living things, well, we would learn that from the word chayim. So it must come to include other non-living things. Udrosh hachi. Mahaprat meforish davar hamitaltel begufo mamon. I've called davar hamitaltel begufo mamon. And so, as a result, let's learn that we should say that anything that is movable and has intrinsic value should be covered. So, but the problem is now we've learned. What have we done? We've learned this from Timatzei, Haganeva, and Shur and Chayim. But we still have two other words in the pasuk. Visu, Shadei, Chamor, Ben Himatzei, Latimatzei. Well, one second. What about putting the donkey between Himatzei and Timatzei? Latuye Mai. What does that come to include? So, if you want to say that it includes things that are not living, Mishornaka, we already learned that from the word shore. So, it comes to include things that have an identifying mark on them. So, anything that has an identifying mark, that would also be included in the items to be covered. Well, sell amali. Okay, so now you've understood why we've got shor and chamor. Well, what about the word seh? We don't have a basis we don't have anything left to learn. So how can we apply this whole concept of klal upradu klal with the himatzei timatzei? It doesn't make sense. We've learned everything there is to learn already. So as a result, we actually go back and say we're not learning it as a klal upradu klal, but rather, just as Charlie asked yesterday, why aren't we asking the question of riba umiyut? So now we're going to raise it. Ella riba umiyet, the ribahu. This is actually an expansion and a limit and an expansion. Ukedatana debei Rabbi Yishmael. And this is like what is taught in Rabbi Yishmael's yeshiva. Tatana debei Rabbi Yishmael. B'mayim shtei pamim, when we had the reference to water twice in a row in connection with animals that are kosher, that are sea creatures that are kosher, ein zeh klal uprat. That is not actually going to be a klal uprat. It's not a situation of generalization and specification. Ella riba umiyat v'riba. That is going to be an expansion, a limitation, and an expansion. And riba hakol, and it comes to include all kinds of bodies of water in that instance. So ma ribe. So what is going to? So now what is going to be included here? Rabbi kol mile. So we're going to include everything. So now we've got everything included. But ihaki kol hani prati lamali. So what do I do with all of the specifications? What do I do with each of the mi'its? So each of them is going to come to exclude something else. So chad lemeute karka. So we have ox, that will come to exclude land. We'll take donkey and we'll use that to exclude slaves. And we have sheep, and so that will come to exclude legal documents. And we'll use the terms, the stolen item and alive, for the teaching of Rab. Now, what is that teaching of Rab? Well, we'll say it in brief at the moment. Because Rav says that when we determine how much is owed, the principal amount that's owed, we look at the amount when it was stolen. That's going to be the principle that we're going to learn from Geneva and Chaim. Now, how do we learn that? And what's the deal with that? That is going to be our cliffhanger for tomorrow. But before we get to that cliffhanger for tomorrow, so we need to understand this how now we now have this pasuk, and we have explained. The bottom line is we've now not used the himatzeh timatzeh, and so as a result, we can now go back to himatzeh timatzeh being the basis for the author of the first brisa saying that an actual thief is liable for the double payment. So now that we've said that, yep.
Yeah. So here we have Reba attributed to Rabbi Ishmael, and most of the rest of the Talmud is attributed to Rabbi Akiva, with Rabbi Ishmael disagreeing.
So I would say the following: the note is that it's only Rabbi Ishmael would effectively agree with Rabbi Akiva when you have a b'mayim mayim situation, when you have two consecutive ribuis. So then two consecutive generalizations, then we're going to not use the principle of klal u'prad u'klal, and we're going to agree with Rabbi Akiva and say in that situation, we will instead switch it to ribui u'miyut. So you're absolutely right. That's exactly, that's how I'm understanding the Gemara, that's exactly the point, that you ordinarily, we would disagree with Rabbi Akiva, but here, where you have two generalizations that are in a row, we're going to actually say, no, we're going to actually change it and say, okay, that's a situation where you got to use Rabbi Akiva's principle. So we've now explained the basis for the first brisa, who said that both Bava and Zion are about Toh and Tainus Ganav. We've now explained how he learns that a ordinary thief is going to be liable. But we've left open for the second author of the second brisa the language of himatzeh timatzeh, and that's where the Gemara is going to go now. According to the author of the second brisa, who says the verse Vav is talking about a thief, and verse Zion is talking about the claim of a thief when you have a watcher. So v'ganav atzmo nafgale me'im timatzeh haganav, and he learns the actual thief from pasuk Vav. Ha'im himatzeh timatzeh my darish bei. What does he learn from the language, the double language of himatzeh timatzeh in pasuk Gimel? So mibailei look at the Rabba bar Ahilai. He uses it for the teaching of Rabba bar Ahilai. Da'amar Rabba bar Ahilai. What does Rabba bar Ahilai say? My time of the Rav. What's the reason of Rav Da'amar Moda b'kanas v'achar kach bo edim pater? That when you have somebody who admits to a fine, and then witnesses still come and testify, he is not going to be liable. This, again, as a reminder, there is a principle that if you, in fact, admit to a fine, then you will not be liable. If you admit to having stolen something, then you can just pay back the original amount. You do not need to pay back double. If you get caught and the witnesses come, then you will be liable for double. Now, the question is, and this is a debate among Amoraim, is what happens if witnesses come after the person admits it? Do we say that, in fact, the person already admitted it, so it's too late, there's no penalty whatsoever? Or do we say, hey, even though he admitted it, because there are witnesses who caught him, so as a result, we're going to still have him subject to the fine. So Rav says we're not going to still have him subject to the fine when witnesses come, and he's going to learn it based on these words. Dixiv im himatzei timatzei, because it says if it's found, if the finding is found. So im himatzei edim, if he is found with witnesses, if the thief is found with witnesses, well then timatzei b'dayanim, well then he's going to be found by judges to be liable for the double payment. So pratla marshia es atzmo. So this comes to exclude a person who incriminates himself. So if he makes himself a rasha, so then we're not going to include him. Now, even if the witnesses later come. Now, note the following. We are going to see another teaching that will also tell us that there's no liability for self-incrimination. Now, the reason that you need two teachings is because if I only have one teaching, I would say that teaching tells us only if the witnesses haven't come yet, and only if the witnesses don't come. But maybe if you only had one teaching about self-incrimination, I would say that that's only if the witnesses never come. But if the witnesses come later, you would still be subject to the double payment. And so we'll see that according to the first brisa, who says that both Psukim Vav and Zion are about Toh and Tainus Ganav, we're going to see that he only has one verse to tell us about a self-incrimination, and as a result, because he only has one verse to tell us about self-incrimination, so he's going to say that if witnesses come later, you would be liable for the penalty. But we'll see that in a moment. Now, according to the Tana, who says that you're liable for both, that both Vav and Zion are talking about the claims of theft by a watcher, who says that you learn the fact that something that an actual thief is subject to the double penalty based on the language of himatzei timatzei, marshia atzmo minalan. How do I know that somebody who admits to a penalty is not going to be liable? Well, mi asher yarshiun Elohim. It's because it says that whom the judges find guilty. So this is a reference to Elohim as judges, not as to God, and so as a result, that's why you can say it. So v'lo hamar she'es atzmo. But the point is that implies not one who incriminates himself. So Ulaman da Amar Chad beganav b'chad b'toin tainus ganav da aiti le mihimatzei timatzei marshia asatzmo hi asher yarshuun my darish bay. Okay, so according to the second brisa, the author of the second brisa, what does he do with the language of asher yarshiun? So Amar Lak hahumi baile lemoda b'knas de pater. We need him to teach us the very fact that one who admits to liability for a fine is not liable. As Rashi says, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up in the narrow lines on Samak Dalet Amabet, Hahumi boile lemoda b'knas de pater im lo bo edim. If acharei kain, if witnesses never come afterwards, we need this pasuk to tell you that you're not liable. Va'aiter im himatzei timatzei, and then we have the extra language of himatzei timatzei liftor afilu bo edim to tell us that even if witnesses do come to iloksiv elachad kra, because if we only had one verse. I would say that only comes to tell us if witnesses never come. But if witnesses do come, then maybe you would be liable for the fine. So as a result, according to the second Tana, the second Brisa, the Tana of the second Brisa, we have both to teach us that whether witnesses do come or don't come, after I admit it, I'm not going to be liable. But according to the first Brisa, who says both Vav and Zion are talking about a thief, are talking about are talking about a watcher who claims theft. Well, then, he would admit that if somebody says that they were guilty and witnesses then come, he will be liable to a fine. So even though he admitted, it's not enough if witnesses come later. So now back to the second one, to second brisa, who says one pasuk is about the thief and one pasuk is about the claim of theft of a watcher. Denav Galei Ganav Mahasam, who learns Ganav from the pasuk Vav. Bishlama im himatzei likid Rava bar Ilai. So it makes sense if we say that himatzei tells us what Rava bar Ilai says, that even if witnesses come later, you're not going to be liable. Aval kol hani prate lamali. But what do I need? All of the specifications in pasuk Gimel to tell us. Remember, he uses all of those specifications in Pasukim Vav and Zayin in order to cover and Chet in order to cover everything that we learned from Pasuk Gimel, according to the first Tana. So look at a Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael. He uses it like the Tana of Yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. The Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael Kol Parsha Shenemar Benishnet Lo Nishneit Ella Ledavar Sheniskadishba. You can have repetition in the Torah as long as there's something new that is learned. And so even though we are learning the exact same thing when it comes to the first psukim, the pasuk Gimel and pasuk Vav through Zayin, through Vav through Chet, that we're going to learn the same klal pradu klal in the two places. So because we're going to learn something new, so we can add to that the Ganav himself, and we'll be able to say that that we've learned something new, and therefore it's okay to have a little bit of repetition. The aim of Ganav atzmo b'shvua. So now the Gemara wonders, well, 1 second, maybe in the very beginning we assumed that when it said that we weren't going to learn from the Kal V'chomer, that we said that maybe the actual thief does need to swear, meaning just as a watcher who claims theft must swear before he's liable for double, maybe a real thief would also have to have some kind of oath. So no, lo salkadai, don't even think that. Detanya Rabbi Akiva Omer, Shnayim Yishalim Shalo B'Shvua, that in fact he pays double even without an oath. How do I know that he pays double? Because maybe he does have an oath. Amarta lo kachaya. That's not it. That's not the way it is. So now the you're probably wondering the same thing that I'm wondering. Which the Gemara is wondering. My lo kachaya. What are you talking about? What does that mean? That's not the way it is, or that's not the way it was. So Amar Abaye explains what that language means in the Brisa. Lo lichtav rachmana shnayim mishalim beganav. The Torah didn't need to write shnayim mishalim. The lazy b'kal v'chomer mitoin tanis ganav, because we could have learned everything from a kal v'chomer. Ma toin tanis ganav debedehetera asalidei. That how does when I'm a watcher who then claims that the item that you gave me to watch was stolen, how did the item get into my hands? It got into my hands legally. I had no violation when it got into my hands because you gave it to me to watch. So Amar Kral the Shalom Trey, and yet I have to pay double if I say it was stolen. So Ganav Atzmo, when you have an actual thief, to be Isura Asaliyeh, where because it came into his hands, the item, the stolen item, illegally, lo kol shekain, he should certainly have to pay double. Ella Shnayim Yishalim to Kasav Rachmana Beganav Atzmo Lamali. So why does it specifically tell us Shnayim Yishalim that he has to pay double? Dafilu Shalo B'Shvua. So because the issue is, if we would have learned it only from the Kal V'chomer, as we saw earlier, we would apply a shvua. So it must be that when we say Shnayim Yishalim, that he has to pay double, we're saying even without an oath. V'hai im himatzei lahachi huda asa. And 1 second, now we are going back a few moments because we have learned both the first brisa and the second brisa have learned something from im himatzei timatzei. The first brisa learned from im himatzei timatzei the fact that a thief is also going to be liable, and the second brisa learned from im himatzei timatzei that the fact that that only somebody who admits, and even if witnesses come later, he will not be liable for the fine. So we've learned something from, we've used im himatzei timatzei. But the problem is, can we really is this available for teaching? We have another brisa that uses im himatze timatze. Because what does the brisa say? Yado. It says that the item is found in his hand. So as we turn to Sanat Hayam and Aleph, Ainli Ella Yado, Gago Chatzero Karpivo Minayan. How do I know that if the item is not found in the literal hand of the thief, but rather in his possession? Maybe it's on his roof, maybe it's in his courtyard, maybe it's in his enclosure, one of these other places. How do I know that he's going to be liable? Talmud Lomar, im himatze timatze mikom makom. That it doesn't make a difference where the item is found. It says found anywhere. So 1 second. That shows that we've just used himatze timatze. So how can we use himatze timatze again? So im kain lema kra. Oh, himatze, oh, timatze. Well, the pasuk could have used the same word twice. Midishane kra, when the fact that the second word was changed, or the first word was changed, so that we reference both himatze and timatze. So shma mina tarti, we can actually learn two things. And so again, the first brisa would learn a thief is covered. The second brisa would learn that the author of the second brisa would learn that you're not liable even if you admit it, even if witnesses come later. And so we've now shown that it's okay to learn two things from himatze timatze. So we go back to the question. Rav said that a thief pays the value of the theft at the time of the theft. So how, in fact, do we say that? And why do we say that? And what's the details of our saying that? Well, for that, you'll need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful week. Look forward to continuing our learning together.
It'll be bad weather tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll take a look and see.